UNESCO is in the news once again. It was actually the topic of one of our burning issues a couple of weeks ago. UNESCO is in the news now, complaining to UNESCO about UNESCO being UNESCO. The issue here is the submission of documents by China of the Nanking Massacre, which the Japanese really are saying it might have happened, but it didn't happen that way. You should listen to our story rather than theirs.
Well, they're certainly making a big stink, at least in the government circles, about the submission that was accepted by UNESCO of documents having to do with the Nanking Massacre of 1937. Now, fine, you can protest all you want, but what the Japanese government did was add to that and putting in the sting of, we won't fund UNESCO unless our issues are dealt with.
Right.
Well, okay, the water is under the bridge. It just looks bad. And yet, the government's not giving up on this thing. We have Minister Hase going on and on about it.
Well, he didn't mention, once again, he didn't mention that we're going to withhold funding. He didn't say that this last press release. So it looks like they are softening their stance a little bit, but they are still they are really opposed to these documents being accepted as submitted.
Well, they think that Japan, I don't know, when they say Japan, do they mean Japanese scholars? Do they mean what they're talking about? Whether that Japan should have had a chance to look at the documents and verify that they are accurate first. Well, fine. What immediately happened after Japan began protesting is that the government of Russia began protesting Japan's submission of its Maizuru documents having to do with the returnees from the Gulag in the Soviet Union.
Which they didn't. They kind of held back, and they didn't really forcefully complain about the submission of those documents.
They didn't until the Japanese government started complaining about Nanjing. Whether there was a phone call from China to Moscow saying, hey, you guys should get on this and make it a big brouhaha, it may have in fact actually happened that way, or it might have been Russian diplomats in Beijing catching on to what's going on. Nevertheless, if we get into this blame game issue and start making threats, Japan is going to be caught because it has put in submitted its own submission of the Maizuru documents as a tremendous condemnation of the Soviet Union in that. And everywhere and anywhere that submits to this international memory project is going to be insulting somebody.
Sure. UNESCO set this up, the international memorialization of events, to collect these kinds of documents just as a defense against peace. I mean, that was the whole theory here, that we document those things that have been documented and we preserve those so that other people can see this is how people acted back then and these are the horrible things that can happen. Peace is probably the better way to resolve diplomatic issues.
Well, it's always UNESCO, the United States got into this game as well involving UNESCO, defunding it for a while based on the United States not liking what UNESCO was doing. UNESCO's caught in a bind. Keeping history means not just keeping records of nice things, it's keeping records of things that are tremendously awful.
Right.
And in the two submissions that we had made by Japan this year, we had both facets. We had the Maizuru documents, which document a horrible experience that Japan's POWs and people who were caught in Manchuria by the move of Soviet forces and the entry of the Soviet Union into World War II, what they went through, so many of them dying, so many of them being held in prison camps in Siberia. Or when Abe went to Kazakhstan, in part of his 5-country tour of Central Asia, he went in Kazakhstan to a prisoner of war camp where Japanese were transported, all the way from Manchuria, all the way to Kazakhstan. And you say, well, what was the purpose of that, aside from abusing these people in some way and using their labor in order to develop that desolate place? That should be committed to memory, but it has political implications. The other submission of Japan was the documents that having to do with Toji Temple, which are the kind of things that probably Hase and other members of the government would like other countries.
Who can argue about that?
You could, temple documents. You know, it's
more than 1,000 years.
More than 1,000 years of temple documents, very, very old, having to do with with land title, which is innocuous.
Right.
Unfortunately, history is not painted with a white brush.
Right. Well, like you said last week, I think, if your hands are not dirty, it doesn't mean that you're pure. It just means that you haven't been doing anything.
That's right. And this is a documenting of the dirty and the clean.
Right.
So let's live with that.